This is Otaku No Video, episode 14. And now we return to Robotech. Hey everyone, this is Brent, and I want to talk this week about Robotech. Eric and Nick can't make it to the podcast this week for various scheduling reasons. And I wanted to talk about this show that came out 20 years ago and kind of clear the air, because Robotech has this special place in anime history, and I think it deserves to be set in the proper place and for folks to understand where it came from. For a long time, a lot of anime fans have had this baggage about Robotech, both good and bad. I mean, Robotech, especially for folks in my generation, early 30s, if you ask folks who were anime fans in their early 30s, you'll find that a majority of them will mention Robotech as one of the anime that got them into anime. And yet, it was heavily edited, it was changed, and it was the locus for a lot of fan frustration about anime releases back in the 80s and 90s. But I wanted to talk about... But I want to clear the air about that, because Robotech has this really interesting history. Robotech was created because the toys for 3 different anime series were licensed over here, completely separately. I think it was Hasbro at the time, just licensed the toys themselves, and then went to Harmony Gold and said, we know that the toys aren't going to sell as well without a cartoon. This is what He-Man showed. This is what Transformers showed. That to sell a toy line, you need a cartoon. So they said, so we license the 3 anime series that these toys came from, these model kits came from, and we want you to slap them all together into a cartoon all together, and the line is called Robotech. That's all we have. You have 8 months. So Harmony Gold had 8 months to package 3 completely different anime series into one show called Robotech. These were 3 anime series that certainly were not bad, but had a significant number of problems, particularly the last 2. They were certainly not intended for international audiences. They had a lot of just Japanese jokes and Japanese gestures and things like that. So this would be a very hard thing to sell to American TV channels. Plus the fact that they were 3 completely different series. One of them wasn't even set on Earth. I mean, there were multiple moons in the sky. So what to do? So they ended up coming up with a way of reworking the plot of all 3 and basically reworking the dialogue, some of the incidental material, into referencing this larger plot, so that the villains from the second piece turn out to be the ones that originally sent the villains from the first series. Of course, that wasn't the case in the original anime, but this is what sort of pulled everything together. They added a few references to the Masters in the first series, so the villains are just mentioning the Masters once or twice, and then in the second series, the Masters show up. Meanwhile, they hired voice talent at the time. Now, voice acting at the time was very, very much a cheap way of making money. I mean, voice actors in the 80s did not make money. So you really couldn't find excellent dubbing talent in the 80s in Hollywood. So they found the best they could, and they dubbed these things. Now, it should be mentioned, a lot of these guys went on to become some of the biggest names in anime dubbing. I mean, some of these folks are now very well respected in anime and in general just as dubbers. But back at the time, again, they were novices. They were not big in their field, or just there wasn't much cachet to it. So you didn't get the highest caliber of people. You got folks who were doing their best. And of course, the series had to be edited down. There was elements of nudity. There were moments of just very strong violence that just wouldn't make it past the American censors. Plus, American TV shows run for less time than Japanese TV shows. There's about 3 minutes more time for commercials in America per half hour than there are in Japan. Of course, that's changed over time. So there was some extra material there, and they had to find some way of trimming that out. It's one of the reasons why they didn't use the original opening and ending credits sequences. It's one of the reasons they don't do that today, because that gives them more of that precious time to show the actual content, so they don't have to edit it down as much. So they sliced this all together. So in 8 months, they re-edited all this together. And while they were doing this, one of the problems was that the animation quality of anime back in the 80s was often not the best. It was often inconsistent. And so a lot of the animation was of questionable quality. Some of the sequences were great, of course, but some of them were just pretty painful. And of course, this was back when anime still hadn't quite gotten the hang of how to put together a really beautiful animated sequence. So you had these shots that were just kind of painfully animated. Well drawn, but just not the right sort of sheet count, not the right sort of drawings for that. So they ended up actually inventing a little piece of technology which allowed them to essentially refilm a sequence, essentially play it back at any frame rate they desired, literally down to the decimal point. So they could take something that was at 30 frames per second and replay it at 32.6 frames per second. And they could do this to sort of smooth out the animation and to take a shot and just redo it more cleanly. And they did this for the animation. And some of the shots that were nicely animated but were kind of slow, didn't have enough of a sheet count, they'd speed up a little bit, things like that, just to make it pop a little more and a little better. And so they re-edited it and released it as Robotech with these very 80s dub jobs. Robotech had a major impact on certainly geek culture in the 80s, certainly on anime culture in the 80s. I mean, Robotech was one of, if not the first major popular anime to come over here. I would argue that Robotech really started the anime industry in America. Certainly if you go back and look at anime fandom, there's a very clear demarcation point. Pre-Robotech, post-Robotech. As far as I know, all of the fanzines, all of the anime clubs coalesced and started after Robotech. Robotech was what really got these things going. But all was not well, because folks were looking at this, and folks were getting interested in anime, and folks were starting to watch anime. And as folks realized what anime was actually like, and what the original material was like, and how distinctive anime was and is, they looked back on Robotech and realized how heavily edited it was, how different it was, how cheesy some of the voice acting was. And you'll notice, I'm trying to be fair to the voice actors. I mean, they were who they were at the time, they were doing their best, and clearly it's not that they are terrible voice actors because they've gone on to become